Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this RBS and NatWest Mentors webinar on managing short-term and long-term absence and key strategies that come along. A really great welcome. For those of you who've not been on here before, my name is Paul Buck. I'm a senior business partner and employment law consultant with the business. I've been here a number of years, and I'm pleased to say I think this is our 12th webinar. So some good intelligence that we've had through the last of the previous webinars, and today is no exception. But before I introduce the people that we've got on today's webinar, please let me go through some housekeeping. Fire alarms. If you hear the fire alarm, please exit the building. If I hear my fire alarm, this chair will be empty, but I'm not anticipating any fire alarms or doorbells going off today. I don't think my children have ordered anything from Amazon. My telephone's on silence. Give yourself an hour. Give yourself this hour just to deep dive into this really important area of employment law. A lot of people will ask, Paul, can I have a copy of the slides? Absolutely, yes. At the end of the session, you'll be asked to complete just a short survey. I think it's 3 or 4 questions. And if you do complete the survey, then all that will happen is you'll go onto the register and you'll automatically be sent an email with a copy of the slide deck and a link to this recording, plus also a little bit of an insight onto our next webinar in the next quarter. So reach out with any questions. If you're anything like me, you'll have a burning question while one of the presenters are talking. Please don't wait till the end. At the bottom of the screen, you should be able to see the Q&A. Populate that Q&A with whatever questions you've got. There's no such thing as a silly question. And myself and my co-host will keep an eye on that Q&A and we'll either answer them live or we'll answer them to the panelists at the end of this short presentation. Please also bear in mind that this webinar is high level, so it's not intended to give specific legal advice. We can't do this on this webinar. So if you do have a tricky situation and you also already have a mentor contact, reach out to that mentor contact. Or even if you don't have a mentor contact and you need some help and support and guidance, give us a call. I'm sure we can help you. So again, keep in mind, this is high level. So enough with the housekeeping. Let me introduce some of the people on today's webinar. First and foremost, let me introduce the co-host. Those of you who've been on these webinars before will notice that I say the lovely Lucy Coombs, but today I've got the amazing Adam Harrison-Moran. Thank you.
Hello there. Thank you. No, thank you for having me. And big shoes to fill, of course, with Lucy, but I will do my best to bring my A game today.
You will definitely be welcomed, and thank you. For those of you who weren't aware, Lucy has a slight skiing accident, nothing too major, but she's been told to put her feet up and rest it. So we'll see who the co-host is for Q3. So again, thank you, Adam. One of the first panelists who we're going to ask to present today is the lovely Hannah Butterworth. Hannah, are you there?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Hannah. I've worked with Hannah for years, and I know that she'll bring a wealth of experience to this webinar, lots of stories. I know that Hannah was heavily involved in advice during the first part of her career. So now as a business partner, she's supporting clients up and down the country with all that lovely knowledge that she has. So Hannah, thank you. It's really appreciated. And equally, I'm excited to say that Mentor joined forces and we have an EAP partner. EAP, we'll get into what an EAP is, but our EAP partner is VivUp. And Tristan is here, Head of Partner Growth from VivUp.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Tristan, thank you for joining us. And I know Hannah, Tristan and Adam are all super busy, so I just want to say thank you for giving up your time. It's really appreciated. So what we would normally do is, on previous webinars, is we would get the panelists to do a presentation and we will look at the slides on a presentation. But over the last few couple of webinars, feedback has been actually just the chat has been more interesting than seeing a slide deck. Hannah's insisted that we have one slide, so we've created that one slide for Hannah, but we're just going to do a Q&A. So I'm going to think of some really topical questions to put to Hannah with her knowledge and experience in managing absence and how to bring that together as a culture. And then I've asked Adam to do the same. So I know he's going to be scurrying away and getting some tough questions for Tristan on that EAP. So if that's all right, Hannah, shall we begin?
Yeah, sure. Ready for it.
Brilliant. So again, if you're watching this, you're listening to this, you've got any questions for Hannah, Adam and I are going to safeguard some time at the end of it just for that rich Q&A. All right? So ask any questions that you have. So let's begin. Hannah, with your knowledge of your clients, both historically and your current portfolio, how much are your clients affected by absences?
Yeah, so good question to start off with, Paul. So just a bit of context. So in May, just gone, we had 1,087 calls to our HR advice line, all related to absence. So ultimately, we're seeing all organisations will have those employee absences. But what we know from the health and wellbeing CIPD data, which was from 2023, is that the average rate of employee absence in the UK was 7.8 days per employee per year. So that's absolutely huge, isn't it, Paul? But what we know is absences, they can be planned, they can be unplanned in the workplace. So they can be holidays, carers leave, parental leave, whereas the unplanned absences, they're the short or long-term sickness absence. But when I'm speaking to managers, Paul, and I ask them, what are you spending the majority of your time doing day to day? 99% of the time, they'll say, Hannah, I'm managing absence. So everyone here, we know and appreciate how complex, how time consuming that can be. But line managers and HR will often understand how much of their time is dedicated to managing that unplanned absence in the workforce and how much it can really affect the workplace as well.
Interesting. It amazes me, Hannah, how you manage to maintain all this data in your head. It always amazes me. But your clients will need support. So your clients will need support. And how do you support your clients with their absence strategy?
So strategy as a whole, so I would say the key is to create that attendance culture. And there is a research company called Ipsos Mori, and they found that if your organisation has a strong employee engagement, it will result in that customer satisfaction and therefore customer loyalty. And as we know, that in turn will lead to a strong turnover and profit, which is a winner for all our clients. So if we start with that employee engagement, one measurement of this is attendance. So if colleagues want to come to work, they will. But if they're feeling disengaged, they may stay away, whatever the consequences. So to avoid those absences and enhance that engagement piece, we really want to create that positive attendance culture. So we should be treating all our team members equally, creating a working environment which is open and honest. So I'll often say to my line managers, do you really know your staff members as individuals? Do we appreciate and understand their individual skills, their knowledge and their capabilities, Paul? And we can achieve that through regular one-to-ones. We should be chatting to the employees about their plans at work, if they have any concerns, what's on their personal development plan, and how that business can support that. So I'll encourage my managers to make time to get to know the staff, actively listen to them and what they have to say. And that will always come back to that having an open and honest culture, and will give managers the opportunity to understand if there are any personal issues and how we can work with that individual to avoid any absences. So that early intervention is key, Paul, and that really could be offering flexibility for time off for dependents, for attending appointments, or it could just be signposting them to employee assistance programme. And those small tweaks to an employee's working week or pattern could avoid any of those unplanned absences.
Interesting. I think the manager intervention, Hannah, from my experience as well, has been key. It's where that relationship lies. It's really interesting. Now, I know that short-term absences can be quite frustrating, and it really does affect workplace more than it should. Have you got any thoughts on how to avoid or reduce short-term absences?
Yeah, of course. So I think my starting point will always be to have that sick leave policy, and that policy outlines a process for managing absence that could be due to illness or injuries. And that well-defined policy helps set clear expectations for employees, providing reassurance during what could be a difficult and uncertain time. So using your policy as a checklist will avoid any breach of contract, but also any confusion or dispute. And ideally, line managers should be the ones managing this process if their employee is absent from work. I'll often find that organisations are quite disjointed, Paul, when the office manager or the HR manager is managing the absence procedure. And it's coming back to that attendance culture and encouraging that open and honest workplace. So if line managers are having that awareness and understanding of who their employees are on an individual basis, it does make it a little bit easier. So when our managers are managing that process, we're building what we call a psychological contract, and that's the unwritten glue that holds the relationship together with the employee, and that leads to stronger relationships. And then when that psychological contract is fulfilled, employees will tend to be more engaged and satisfied and loyal.
Perfect. I'm picking out a theme here, Hannah, and it's all around the management of it. Completely agree.
Yeah.
A policy is great and it's really simple to achieve. Come on, what else can you suggest for line managers?
Yeah, it's really simple to achieve a policy. There's a few techniques that I can suggest. So we've got a capability policy, or trigger points, or implementing the Bradford factor, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. But one of my favourites and beneficial ways to manage and deter those short-term absences are return to work interviews. So employees are less likely to take unnecessary time off when they know they'll be required to discuss their absence the next day. But also by showing care and concern, employers can foster a positive working environment and improve employee morale. Okay, so we know, Paul, that the purpose of these interviews is to establish if the employee is ready, are they willing, and are they able to perform their duties. So if we're focusing on those short-term absences, here are the steps that I'd want you to follow, Paul, if you were a manager doing a return to work interview. So number one, ask the employee, how are you? How long will you be off? When do you expect to be back? And agree how you'll keep in contact and if there is anything the company can do and to support them at that point. Number two, check the employee's absence record and prepare for that return to work interview. Have they submitted a fit note or a self-certificate? Have they reached any trigger points? And is there a breach of contract here? You know, have they followed that absence reporting procedure? And if not, why not? Number three, we should be thinking as a manager, how am I going to cover this absence? How can we avoid any negative impacts on other colleagues and operations?
Okay.
Four, we should be alert and seek advice if the employee doesn't keep in contact, or if they've hit an absence trigger, or if there's any patterns of absence as well. We should further be alert if the fit note indicates that the absence is work related, or if their absence is due to a medical condition, or if they're pregnant. And then, Paul, I'd finally be asking you to focus on, are they fit to return? Are there any adjustments that we could put in place now or in the future that will help them? And are there any underlying health conditions that's caused the absence? Okay. But I think I can't stress enough, you should always remain open-minded about an employee's absence rather than to jump into any conclusions, Paul, as we know can happen. But understanding that root cause of absenteeism will be important. And until that cause is correctly identified, we can't really identify an appropriate course of action to remedy it.
No, I don't disagree at all, Hannah. I think that remain open-minded point is quite poignant because, you know, as a manager in a previous role, I would know why they was off sick. So I think to remind myself to remain open-minded, I think is a really useful point. Brilliant.
Definitely.
Short-term absences, I get it. We've covered that. What about those long-term absences, Hannah? I dread those.
Yeah, absolutely. So do I. So, long-term absences is consistently the most common issue that our customers are contacting our HR advice line for.
Okay.
So, around 15% of our calls are for long-term sickness absence. And that compares to dismissals for employees with less than 2 years service, which sits at around 10% of our calls. So there's quite a jump there, Paul.
Okay.
And we know that long term is classed as continuous absence lasting for 4 weeks or more. Here's some more data for you. So according to the figures from Office for National Statistics, last year it was reported employees who are inactive due to long-term sickness in the UK has increased by 300,000 to 2.8 million. So
Wow.
huge challenge for businesses of all sizes.
Wow.
And from that, one of the most common health conditions cited as the reason for long-term sickness was to do with mental health, with just over 300,000 suffering from a mental illness of some sort. Okay, so whatever the reason for long-term sickness, my top tip is to establish a contact strategy, Paul, with the employee right from the start of the absence. So you should agree what that contact will look like, whether it's bi-weekly, whether it's monthly, or it could be whether it's face-to-face or even telephone-based. But what I would say is, if you need any other support on long-term absences, speak to your contact at Mentor or call our advice team.
Oh, brilliant, Hannah. I think that long-term contact strategy has been key in a number of cases that I've dealt with where the manager has said, that's great, but let's put something in the date for next week and follow this up just as a welfare check.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That data's quite scary, Hannah.
Massively.
So you've worked with lots of sectors, I know you have, up and down the country. Are there any patterns for certain industries?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm finding mental health challenges quite prevalent in the construction industry. They've got high rates of stress, anxiety, depression, and we know it comes down to factors like high pressure work environments, unrealistic deadlines, long hours, as well as that culture that may not be supportive of open conversations about mental health. So just on that, I'm working on kind of a comprehensive approach with these organisations and exploring various elements on how to reduce these factors in the workplace. But it's crucial to raise awareness about mental health issues and to educate your workers, your supervisors, but also management. And an easy way to support your employee is to sign them to charities such as mine, which absolutely everyone's heard of. And you'll find these charities, Paul, have online resources. So sometimes they have helplines for employees to contact as well. But one of my favourites that I use with a lot of my clients is the Mind Wellness Action Plan, which helps you identify any trigger points for your employees and what actions that we can put in place to avoid absences. So having that clear plan with your employee.
I like it, Hannah. I like it.
Good.
I'm just thinking of a clever question, and I know I said I wouldn't ask an advice question, but what if an employee doesn't give consent? Because I know that employees have to give consent for the employer to contact the GP, but what if they don't give consent to contact the GP or even an occupational health report? What can an organisation do?
Yeah, it's a good question, one that comes up quite a lot. So it's definitely worth trying initially, but we don't legally require a GP or occupational health report before taking any action. So if your employee states there's no way I'll be able to return to work in the near future at all, then we can look at a dismissal under medical capability, Paul. But in most cases, there will be reasonable adjustments suggested by the employee or the medical expert, which we may legally be required to explore. So I can talk about reasonable adjustments all day, so I won't go into much detail there, but ultimately our aim is to balance our business needs with the appropriate support for the employee, and that flexibility may be necessary to accommodate that medical advice and ensure that there's quite a fair and legal compliant approach here.
Brilliant. It's always a nervous area of absence management, I've always found, Hannah. So that really brings it to life. Now I know I challenged you with, Hannah, what are your top 10 tips? And you've kindly shared with me your top 10. So I'm going to share those now for everybody to see. And hopefully that works. So Hannah's top 10. Are you ready?
We only have 7 today, Paul, but that'll do.
Sorry, top 7. Thank you.
Quality, not quantity. So, top tip number one is conducting effective absence and welfare calls. Please don't be afraid to contact your employees. There might be times when an employee will ask for no contact, but explore other ways of contacting them, such as letters or emails, rather than a telephone call. As mentioned previously, welfare meetings can be face-to-face in a cafe, they can be on telephone or Zoom, but your managers should prepare for these conversations and have any relevant information ready. Tip number two, keeping in touch. Employees need to be treated the same, and one way to ensure this is to follow a set procedure. So the earlier you start those conversations regarding absence, the more appropriate and relevant support you'll be able to provide to your employee. Number three, making a really good occupational health referral. So when you're making your referral to the provider, send specific questions. Send them the employee's job role, your absence record in the past 12 months, and this will allow them to assess the employee's fitness in the context of their job role with tailored advice on facilitating a return to work. Then sit down and discuss that report with the employee. You may find sometimes that GP reports are limited to what they can advise compared to occupational health reports. However, they are still really beneficial to understand the employee's medical diagnosis first. Tip number four, build trust by listening to your employee. So it's important that organisations are supportive, as we know, as this will help people open up and enable the company to put the right support mechanisms in place. Number five, signposting them to charities. So there are many charities out there for different medical conditions, and I'll often encourage my clients to Google charities such as Mind, as they've got that guidance and support for employers as well as employees. Tip number six, we've got mental health first aiders. So having trained mental health first aiders in the business can provide that early intervention and support to colleagues experiencing mental health difficulties. They can offer that non-judgmental listening and guidance, but they're not therapists or counsellors at the end of the day. And then my final top tip is having an employee assistance programme that's available to all staff. So it's a workplace benefit that offers confidential support and resources to employees facing those personal or professional challenges that may impact their well-being and performance. So we will come on to talk more about that, but having your EAP may speed up being able to manage the absence if you've got another tool in your box, really.
Outstanding.
7.
Hannah, brilliant.
Yeah.
And I really like your top 7 tips, because it isn't a priority order, really, is it? You could have one or all in any particular order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like it.
yeah.
Outstanding. Hannah, thank you so much. Shall we hand over to Adam and Tristan? So they'd run off. Hannah, don't go away. We've got some questions for you, so we'll speak to you in a bit. Adam, Tristan, over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Paul. And again, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be joining you today. Hannah, just got to say before we do crack on, that was brilliant. Some really insightful stuff there around absence management. And I'm sure you could probably sit there all day and reel off the absence do's and don'ts, but those top tips are really useful. And as you said, it does tie in nicely with this next part of our session. So firstly, just to introduce myself again, for anyone that missed the start of the webinar, my name is Adam Harrison-Moran, and like Paul and Hannah, I'm a business partner at Mentor, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tristan Rigby from VivUp, who has, as Paul mentioned, who are our EAP partners. Tristan, before we get into what an EAP is all about, please come in and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tristan Rigby. I'm Head of Partner Growth here at VivUp. I've worked in the EAP industry for over 15 years across a couple of different organisations. EAPs are becoming more and more valuable with organisations. And the last EPA stats, which is our governing body, stated for every £1 spent on EAPs, clients are seeing a huge return of £10.85 back. So no, pleasure to be here, Adam.
Yeah, thank you very much. And really interesting. I mean, you highlight that return on investment there. It sounds great, but let's get into it firstly. What exactly is an employee assistance program, or an EAP? Because there'll be lots of people on the call today who won't know what it actually is. And more importantly, how does it help to reduce absence in the workplace?
Sure. So an EAP, or an employee assistance program, is professional counselling, information and advice 24/7, that's available 24/7 every single day of the year. As Hannah quite rightly said, it doesn't just have to be for work-related issues. It could be personal related concerns as well. But a lot of people, when they hear EAP, they immediately think of counselling only. But actually, it's much broader than that. It's not just counsellors that work for an EAP. They have citizens advice trained information specialists. They have specialists in all different types of areas, including debt. An EAP gives employees direct access to confidential support for, as I say, things like mental health, to financial worries, to relationship challenges. And when people are struggling with something outside of work, it often shows up as an absence or presenteeism. Giving them a safe, quick way to speak to someone, whether that's a trained counsellor or someone to offer practical advice, means issues are less likely to spiral and result in time off.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I think because often people will think an EAP is generally used in crisis situations, but it doesn't sound like from what you said there that's the case.
No, not at all. While we do obviously support people in crisis, a lot of the calls are about things, as I say, like day-to-day things like financial stress, sleep issues, or just someone feeling a little overwhelmed. In fact, a lot of the benefit comes from that early intervention. The EAP is there to stop something small becoming big, and that has a direct knock-on effect on absence, performance, and general overall well-being.
Yeah, I completely agree on those points. I think early intervention really is crucial to avoid those direct knock-on effects that you just mentioned there. Okay, so we've already spoken a lot today about communication and keeping in touch with employees during absence management. So I'm wondering, what role can an EAP play in supporting managers with those absence-related conversations?
Yeah, this is a big one, Adam. Managers are often the first people to notice a pattern of absence or that something's not quite right for that employee, but they don't always feel confident having those tricky conversations. With an EAP, you'll find the counsellors are management support trained. They can also have somewhere to signpost their team to. It also gives them tools and guidance for handling the situation in a supportive, consistent way, whether that's having a return to work conversation or identifying when to escalate.
Yeah, no doubt there'll be lots of managers on the call to be having those conversations right now, those tricky conversations. There'll also be a lot of business leaders on the webinar today thinking, yeah, it sounds great, but does it really work? So I'm just wondering if you can give me an example of how an EAP has helped turn things around for an organization that's maybe struggling with high absence rates.
Yeah, definitely. One of our clients had a spike in stress-related absences, and it was impacting things like productivity and team morale. We worked with them to promote the EAP properly, not just a poster in the staff room or at the back of a toilet door, but some real engagement through things like manager briefings, team sessions, and constant reminders during onboarding. And within a few months, more people were using the service proactively, and we saw a measurable drop in absence related to stress. So it's about making help easy to access before things reach that breaking point.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's always great to hear a success story, and I'm sure you could sit here a while longer and tell us plenty more that you've got as well. Interestingly, what I picked up on there from what you said, that you raise a really good point about the importance of building engagement with an EAP. And I've had questions from business in the past around, how do you make sure employees actually use the service? Because isn't it one of those benefits that people simply forget about?
Yeah, it can be if it's not done right. So the key is visibility and normalization. So we work closely with our partners to embed the EAP into the culture. So things like regular comms, line management engagement, well-being campaigns, and making it part of everyday language, not just something that gets mentioned once a year. Also, we provide things like usage reports and trends. Obviously fully anonymous, it's completely confidential, but so employees can see what areas might need more focus and where it's making a real difference.
Okay, it's good to know that you can review the usage data and I guess make sure it's doing exactly what it needs to be. Okay. Earlier, Hannah touched on creating an attendance culture. I'm wondering if you're able to tell us what's the difference between creating an attendance culture and maybe just simply managing absence.
Sure. So managing absence is reactive. You're dealing with the time off after it's happened. Creating an attendance culture is more proactive. It's about building a workplace where people feel supported, valued, and able to show it consistently. An EAP helps you get ahead of the curve. It shows your people that their well-being is a priority, which in turn builds trust, it reduces stress, and encourages attendance for the right reasons, not just because people feel guilty or scared to call in sick.
Yeah, I completely agree. Interesting. I think that really highlights Hannah's earlier points around proactivity, encouraging those right behaviours. Okay, final question. You'd be glad to know. This comes up quite a lot, but what I want to know your advice to employees who want to improve attendance, but they don't want to come across as, policing absence.
I'd always recommend and focus on the why. Why does attendance matter? It's not about catching people out. It's about creating a space where people want to come to work and feel able to talk if they're struggling. An EAP supports that shift. It's a resource, not a punishment. Framing it as a way to support employees rather than trap them goes a long way in creating a healthier, more open culture.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure getting to know a little bit more about EAP. I'm sure there's questions coming into the chat as we're speaking now about what, some more details on that. And again, we could sit here all day talking about the ins and outs of the EAP that Mentor now offers. But Paul, you'll be able to come back in. Hannah, how are we doing?
Really well, thank you. Really well. Tristan, that was ace. I'm overwhelmed with the EAP. I think it's a really, really good tool. Really good.
Okay.
Lots of questions coming in. Lots of questions. Can I just remind everybody this is high level and it's really difficult when you're asked a question, because what I want to do is ask 10 more questions in reply before I can give specific advice. So if you are dealing with a particular situation and you think, do you know what, we really need some support on this, if you don't use Mentor, you can always set up an account with Mentor and see if that will resolve the problem. But my top tip, and I'm sure Hannah would agree, is get some advice, get some trained legal advice on this. Hannah, I've got some great questions that I've stolen, and I know Adam's itching to ask some as well. But the one question that I really enjoyed that I saw was, what's the Bradford factor? Is it in Bradford?
Is it in Bradford? It's so the Bradford factor is it's a formula used to assess the impact of an employee's absence. So usually short, frequent, unplanned absences, and it's based around the idea that we've got multiple short absences. They're more disruptive to a business than a single long absence the same duration. So there's a calculation which includes the number of absences and the total number of days absent. Businesses tend to use it as a way to manage short-term absences as a bit of a trigger point system. The difficulty with the Bradford factor is that it can come with quite a lot of admin and time, keeping on top of it, Paul. Businesses also need to take into consideration disabilities, because you may find they have more sickness absence and they're reaching trigger points quicker. So you should take that into consideration to avoid any disability discrimination.
Okay, just before Adam steals the floor, have you got a preference? Because I know there are triggers, so just explore triggers a little bit for me. What do we mean by triggers?
Triggers is that predefined level of employee absence that will prompt a review or some sort of intervention by HR, by line managers, by the employer. So it's having that threshold. For example, 3 absences in 6 months, that would hit a trigger, and therefore the manager would be having some sort of conversation or intervention with that staff member.
And lastly, Hannah, have you got a preference?
I would probably say absence triggers over Bradford factor. It's just a little bit more simple. It's an easy, straightforward policy that managers can follow. They just need to be followed throughout the whole business to avoid any breach of contract or employee relation issues.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I find there's a better interaction when you use the trigger system between a manager and an employee versus a Bradford factor, which is follow this flow chart, follow these numbers.
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
I know Adam well enough. He's got a question.
I've got a question for Tristan, actually. I know we've got a lot coming through around absence, but just before I do, top marks to the first question that came through, asking about if we're going to have a case study on managing short-term absence following ski accidents. Thought that was really pertinent after we mentioned Lucy at the top of the call, but yeah, top marks for that one. Tristan, question for yourself. If someone is already with the crisis team for their mental health, can an EAP advise that they cannot help further?
So yeah, every EAP is very different. What EAPs will do is to make sure that they're not going to be a conflict with an additional mental health service that's in place. We don't want to contradict any longer term support that you're getting. However, for ourselves, with our partnership with Mentor, what we would do in that situation is that we could still support people in the moment while they're in between any other mental health support that they're getting. So we wouldn't leave them high and dry. We would still provide that in the moment support, which is completely unlimited. So yeah, every EAP is different when it comes to this, but EAPs manage it in a way where they're not going to be a conflict to any additional support that they're receiving.
Fantastic. So important point there is just to reach out. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Before you jump back in, Paul, I did just have another question. I want to pass over to Hannah, if that's okay. Interesting one that came in that asked, are we allowed to ask employees for a more detailed reason for absence rather than just seeing the reason as sickness on the return to work form?
Yeah, really good question. And it comes back to what we were talking before about those return to work interviews. So that should be a sit down conversation between the manager and the employee. There is a form that you can follow on our Mentor docs. Ultimately, we should be asking them, what is the reason for the sickness? Is it diarrhea? Has it got a headache? What is that reason? And then we can start to see any patterns. But ultimately, if we're asking them for the reason of sickness, then we can understand if there are any underlying health conditions, whether that's a physical condition, whether that's mental illness, and that is building your evidence as well. So if you just kept putting sickness as an absence reason on your return to work interviews, and then 6 months later you wanted to dismiss, we've not got that understanding of, is there any underlying health conditions or is there any mental health there that we should be aware of? But good question.
Certainly a complex area, Hannah.
Mm.
I'm glad you've got a good grip on this. You're going to need to lie down in a dark room after this hour. I've got a great question. If we have a staff member who's signed off sick by the GP, do they still accrue annual leave?
Yeah. Still an employee of the business, so they'll still continue to accrue holidays during any sort of sickness leave.
Okay. So that accrual just continues as though they were still in the business.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Adam, have you got one?
Sorry, Hannah, but I'm going to come back to yourself if that's okay.
Yeah.
A question that came in and said, I've gone via an employee's GP to obtain a medical report. They have requested I get in touch with occupational health. How do I get in touch with occupational health? Because my employee doesn't have, an occupational health contact or information.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad you've been to the GP first to get that report, to get that diagnosis. They've obviously recommended occupational health, which goes into a lot more detail about the employee's role, and it's a bit of a role assessment. I would just say just Google occupational health providers in your area. Depending on the employee's role, a lot of them are remote these days, so you can do some comparing, some comparison, taking costs into consideration and what they've got to offer. A lot can be face-to-face assessments, they can be telephone assessments, they can be Zoom assessments. So if the role is based at home, you can pick up an occupational health provider, which is based anywhere in the UK basically. But yeah, do a bit of research on Google and see, have a look at some reviews.
And
Brilliant.
I've got a great question, and I've had this a number of times, and I'm sure you definitely will have. What do we do with those pesky employees who say, I'd like some annual leave, but the annual leave's declined, and they go off sick instead? We
Happens,
love them.
happens all the time, doesn't
We love
it?
them. Yeah.
And again, Paul, it comes back to that return to work interview, and you can tell when someone's maybe fibbing, you know, they don't want to sit in front of their manager after coming back off sick leave when we know that they wanted annual leave, so whatever they've been up to, and lying in front of the manager. If you've got evidence that perhaps they weren't off sick for whatever reason they've said, maybe you've seen something on Facebook, you can have a conversation with that staff member about it.
Yeah.
Do your investigations.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely right. For me, I've seen those return to work meetings be almost pieces of gold as with regards to information to build up a really strong picture of that. So yeah, it goes back to what you told me earlier about the management and the control of the return to work meetings. Yeah, get it. Thank you, Hannah. Adam, have you got anything there?
There's still lots coming through. I'm just trying to have a see if there's anything specific for our EAP. There is something kind of asking more about kind of the self-help element. You know, how do EAPs proactively manage someone's mental health? You know, if someone's struggling, if someone's in a crisis, what essentially what can they do when they go onto the system? Maybe how's it going to support absence?
So with ourselves, with our partnership with Mentor, we have a great proactive wellbeing site called Your Care, and there's lots of assessments built into the platform to proactively manage people's mental health. And for example, when it's asking you the assessments about someone's anxiety and depression, if the platform feels somebody would benefit from speaking to a counsellor, an alert actually comes up and says, I recommend you speak to a VivUp counsellor, click this link, and then you go straight through to a member of the counselling team. So having those prompts, the feedback we get is that lots of people are picking up the phone and having that early engagement piece before it becomes a bigger problem. Our philosophy is all about trying to support someone before it becomes a bigger crisis. We want people to pick up the phone, speak to a counsellor when it is just a little niggle at the back of someone's mind, because we don't want people to get to that moment of crisis where they need time off work to manage their stress because they're looking after themselves on a day-to-day basis. The Your Care site is fantastic for that. There's something for everyone. It's not just the 5 to 15% that might use the EAP service for counselling. For the counselling line, there's something on there, things like the HelloFresh recipes are on there. There's assessments to live a healthier, longer life for the top 5 lifestyle diseases, so things like dementia, cancer, those sort of things. There really is something for someone there, but predominantly it's about looking after your mental health in a proactive way.
Brilliant, perfect. Thank you for that, Paul. Any more questions?
I've seen a really cheeky question down here, which I think I've not come across this. Is it normal for GPs, Hannah, to charge you £40 to provide you with a letter answering your health questions regarding one of your employees?
Yeah, I've had a few clients who have said that before, 30, £40, maybe £40 the new rate.
Wow, new news for me, that. Interesting. Okay. Another question that I like. What do we do when we have tried to keep in touch, but the employee does not send a doctor's note or reply to messages or calls?
So ultimately, in that situation, the employee would be AWOL, so absence without leave. First point of call would be ring their next of kin. So hopefully you've got that information. Ring the next of kin, see if that person can provide any further information as to where your employee is, what are they up to, are they poorly, is there something that we need to know about? If you can't get hold of their next of kin, or you don't have that data for any reason, write to them. Write to your employee, record a delivery, and give them a deadline to make contact with you or the business. If they do make contact, great. Arrange a welfare meeting with them, and we can understand a little bit more about what's going on. If they don't make contact with you or the business as per that deadline, send them an invitation into an investigation meeting, and we can take it from there. But sometimes it's a lot case by case basis and will depend on a lot of things. So definitely ring our advice line and take advice on that situation.
Yeah. Thank you. I do apologise. I think I've opened up a bit of a Pandora's box. I've got somebody who works in a GP surgery saying, yes, Paul, that's correct. And then somebody's wrote in to say, we were asked to pay £150 for said report. So, oh dear, oh dear. Adam, have you got any more?
Yeah, a couple of questions regarding return to work meetings. So I know that's going to come back to yourself, Hannah. A lot of people asking how often should we be doing them, and is there a kind of a specific absence length when you should complete a return to work?
So my advice and what I encourage all my clients is to do your return to work interviews even after a day's absence, sometimes half a day's absence. And I know that sounds quite a lot of work, but these conversations can just be 5 minutes with your employee at the start of the day, as soon as possible. Sit down with the employee, go through that form, get it signed off, and then store that somewhere safe. So yeah, I know that sounds like a lot of work, but even after a day's absence, we still need to know why they were off.
Yeah, I think the key thing that I always relate to my clients well is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep that consistency, because as soon as you let it slip, people pick up on that, and then where do you go from there?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes down to, your managers having that confidence and ability to hold these conversations, and that comes with a bit of training for them and using the form on mentor docs to make it a little bit easier for them to have these conversations. But they definitely work, and they act as a deterrent for staff taking your odd days off here and there when they don't necessarily need to.
Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. And Paul, sorry, I'm just going to jump back in one for Tristan. We've got some questions here about the EAP. Are the counsellors general counsellors covering a variety of areas, or do you have specialists? So maybe some counsellors specialise in grief following the loss of a loved one. It's quite specific there. I don't know if you can answer that one for us, Tristan.
Yeah, so both actually. So we have general counsellors. The whole service is APS accredited, which means that we can provide support for short-term issues, using a 6-session model. But also we have specialist counsellors as well. So we have menopause specialists, we have bereavement specialists. We purposely provide a triage service in the first moment, and that's just to make sure that everybody gets the right support at the right time. So if somebody does need that specialist support, then we can put them straight through to a counsellor that has that specialism.
Brilliant. Thank you. Interesting.
Any
Paul?
more, Adam? Because you keep stealing the show.
No, go ahead. Go on, I'll let you jump back in.
I've got a brilliant question here. Hannah, looking at absence from the other way around. Not seen this for a while. If an employee is insistent on working and refusing to get signed off, but you're concerned about the mental or physical health, what would you recommend as appropriate action? I'm fit and fine. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, and it happens a lot more than you think, actually. People do want to come to work, and obviously that shows that you do maybe have that attendance culture, which is key, as we've talked about today. If you've got serious concerns about their risk, their health and safety, coming to work, regardless if that's mental health challenges or an illness, or perhaps it's a physical medical condition, I would start off with having a risk assessment to understand how much of a risk that person is coming to work. If that comes out, you know, and it's huge and you can't put any specific measures in place or adjustments that will bring that risk down, and that you really strongly believe they shouldn't be coming to work for whatever reason, we can look at what we call medical suspension, which is on full pay. But having a conversation with that staff member to understand, you know, what they think about this, where their heads are, what they're doing to support any sort of condition or impairment is probably key as well. So coming down to that open and honest feedback culture.
You've seen that a lot, have you?
I've seen it a few times.
Okay. Tends to be the other way around, but interesting to hear. Okay. Adam, is there any questions from you?
Yes, sorry to come back to you again, Hannah, but I think because we've spoke a lot about keeping in contact, return to work meetings, a good question here earlier on that says, what can you do if an employee refuses to discuss their absence with you? So maybe you ask them when they're likely to return, but maybe they're just not engaging. What would be your best advice there?
I'd probably start off with asking why. Why are they not willing to share that information? Is it the fact that they don't want to speak to their line manager for whatever reason? Do they want to speak to someone else, perhaps HR or a different line manager, to share the reasons for absence? Could it be they're not willing to sit in front of the manager at a welfare meeting to discuss their absence? Would they rather email it? You could do question and answers over email or over a letter. There are lots of different factors that you can take into this question, really, can't you, Adam? But understanding the root cause, understanding why don't you want to share this information with us? Do you want us to go to your GP to talk about it? But yeah, creating that open, honest culture is key again.
Perfect. Thank you. Paul, am I okay to jump straight back in with Tristan? I've got another question that's come through.
Absolutely.
Is it okay if I mention speaking to someone at Mentor to get a quote, or are EAPs also used by small businesses? And if so, how do we convince senior leadership to introduce us when only a small number of people might use it? So quite a few kind of questions in one there, but generally how they can introduce it to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. More and more SMEs, you know, really small micros as well, are looking to add an EAP into their service. You know, we work with organisations with, you know, 2 or 3 employees right through to 20,000. So it doesn't matter on the size of the organisation. What we have with our partnership with Mentor is really great to answer that question, because there's 3 different service levels. So it might not be that you've got the budget for the, you know, all singing, dancing, comprehensive offering. It might be that you want to just start with an in-the-moment support line and access to the Your Care site that I mentioned earlier. And obviously that price is a lot cheaper. So I'd recommend, you know, speaking to your Mentor rep to get a quote if it's something that you'd be interested in.
Brilliant. Thank you. Paul, you have any questions?
I do. Let's squeeze some in quickly before Hannah runs off.
I say, running out of time.
To encourage the return to work to be face-to-face and insist that the employee does not work from home on the first day, except, of course, if they have mobility issues relating to their recent absence. This is something I battle with managers over. Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. I think you have to consider, again, lots of different factors into this, and it's case by case basis, as it always comes down to an employment law and HR, the facts of the case. If they normally work in the office, return to work interviews face to face is great. It just depends on what the reason for the sickness is, doesn't it? So if they're struggling with mental health, perhaps they need a couple of days or a phased return, depending on how long that they've been off for, ease them back into the office. So yeah, your return to work interview can be over the phone, it can be face to face, it can be over Zoom if your employee is a home worker. Again, it's just fact specific to the case, really. So difficult to answer, but explore lots of different alternatives and options for you and your employee.
Yeah, I think it takes you back to that psychological contract, doesn't it? Where if
Yeah.
I'm meeting with my line manager in person, discussing my illnesses or challenges that I'm facing face to face, because we're social creatures, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Adam, have you found any last-minute questions to squeeze in?
I've not. I thought we might finish on that one, unless you've seen a quick
No,
one.
no, no. I've got a couple more, Hannah.
Go on.
I'm sorry, but you've got the answers to them. My understanding is that employers can't force an employee to disclose the specific reasons for their absence. Is this correct?
I wouldn't say it's correct. So we can't force them to provide us the answer, obviously, if they're not willing to share that. But we're not medical experts. So without us understanding the reasons for sickness, we can't take any informed decisions or the best course of action. We can't support the employee appropriately. We can't remedy or put in any reasonable adjustments without understanding what the cause of the absence is. So explaining that to the staff member, again, psychological contracts, making them feel trusted, making them feel safe in what they have to say is important. But ultimately, we can't move forward or take appropriate action if we don't understand the absence, the reason for the
Okay.
absence.
Okay. Before Adam jumps back in, Hannah, you mentioned triggers earlier on, and I'm a lover of the triggers system as opposed to the Bradford factor. But from your experience, have you got like an average trigger across your portfolio of clients?
How many of my clients use absence triggers?
No. What the trigger is? Is it 3 days, 5 days, 9 days? 3 occasions, whatever.
Well, everyone's very different, to be honest, Paul.
Okay.
Depending on lots of different things. I always probably would recommend a starting point is about 3 occasions of absence in 6 months.
Okay.
That's quite a significant amount of absences.
Yeah.
And then the client would tailor that depending on different business needs.
I think you need a starting point, really, don't you? If you've
Yeah.
never used it before, then you can manipulate around that.
Yeah, see what works, give it a bit of a performance review.
Hannah, just to give you a break for a second, but somebody's asked, where do I find all the documents that Hannah has mentioned? So Mentor create these documents. So if you are a client of Mentor, we would bespoke these documents and supply you with whatever you need, whether that's an absence policy, return to work documentation. It's all the stuff that we create. So like I say, if you don't have any specialist support, by all means, look us up on the website. I'm going to provide some links. You can find us, and should you wish to join Mentor to get this, or even if you need your own dedicated business partner like Hannah, then definitely reach out to us. So Adam, any last minute questions that you've spotted? There's been loads, hasn't there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think one we can get a really quick answer to. An earlier one that said, what should the average time be between contact with an employee who's on long-term sick?
Sorry, again, Adam.
Yes. It should be a quick one, because is there an average time? Is there a thing that we should be doing?
What, when an employee's on long-term sick?
Yeah, so contact between, so we say we pick up in a month, we say we're gonna, call them again in a month's time. Is there an average that we should be following, or is it just specific to the situation?
Yeah, it's specific to the situation, and coming back to what we talked about earlier with Paul, the sooner you start that conversation with the employee at the start of their absence, the more effective it's going to be, and the more engaged the employee is going to be. So right at the start of their absence, have that contact strategy and agree it with the employee, and that might change depending on different things. But setting out your plan from day one, really, if you've got a long-term sickness and fitness.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I put that little question in because I know people often think that there is a particular timeline you have to follow, but every absence is different, and it's all about managing those specifics, isn't it? So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gents, we are now out of time. So I'm going to draw it to a close. Again, if you want to copy the slides and a link to the recording and a link to the next webinar, please complete the survey. If you've auto-enrolled, you'll be automatically included for the next webinar. So I just want to say a massive thank you. Hannah, you answered those questions eloquently. Thank you so much. Tristan, love the EAP now. It's a great tool in my toolbox. Thank you for joining us today. And Adam, thank you for being the co-host. What a great job you did.
Thank you very
We'll be
much.
jealous. So again, everybody, thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.